Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Scott Giacomucci. I'm the director and founder of the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy in Media, Pennsylvania. And today I wanted to talk about the topic of imposter syndrome and how it relates to trauma. So this concept of the imposter syndrome is basically the feeling and experience that you're a fraud, or that you don't deserve success, or that you're not good enough, or that in any moment someone might find out that you're not who they think they are, that you're not as capable as they think. And this is really a universal experience that far more people than anybody realizes experience this imposter syndrome. It's common, but it's even more common for trauma survivors. So in this video, we're going to explore the connection between the imposter syndrome and trauma, and we'll talk about some ways of breaking free from the self-doubt that comes with it. So this experience of questioning whether we're good enough or feeling like an imposter is incredibly common. Just about every student, supervisee, colleague, client, friend that I talk to, at some point in our relationship, they admit to feeling not good enough or feeling less than and struggling with these feelings of self-doubt. It's incredibly common, maybe a universal experience. Now, of course, there are some people that don't experience this and they tend to trend in the overconfidence, or perhaps even have narcissistic traits. But I think this is more or less a common experience for the average person. One of the stories that I often tell my students, that when I was in my doctorate program, we were in the first week and we were, 20 of us on campus. We were at a fancy Ivy League university, and many of us were feeling like we were imposters, that we didn't belong. And the entire first week of the program, we met all the professors, and with every new professor, we all had to introduce ourselves again as a group. And so we constantly were hearing everybody's successes, everybody's credentials, everybody's statuses and roles in their professional life, all the amazing things that they were doing as social workers. And after a couple of days, somebody in the group brought up the topic of imposter syndrome. And they said, man, hearing everybody's credentials and successes makes me wonder if I belong in this group, in this cohort. I feel like I haven't done as much as everybody else has done. I feel like I'm an imposter here, like I'm a fraud. And that courageous classmate sparked a conversation where we went around almost one by one, and nearly everybody else in our cohort felt the same thing. Everybody felt like they weren't good enough. One after another, we shared about how we connected to this. And then to top it off, the director of the program at the time shared about feeling similar things, that she shared about hearing all of the students' successes and achievements and wondering if she was good enough or accomplished enough to be the director of the program, to be a mentor to us. And so this experience really struck me and stuck with me. And it was a reminder that even the most accomplished people in a doctorate program in a very prestigious university also feel a sense of insecurity, that this imposter syndrome shows up anywhere and everywhere. So in this video, I want to highlight how trauma relates to this imposter syndrome. And there's lots of different connections here, lots of different threads that we'll talk about. Maybe the first and most obvious is that when we experience trauma, it can leave us feeling like we're not good enough. When we experience neglect or abandonment or verbal abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse or violence, when we experience anything that leaves us feeling worthless or broken, that really challenges our sense of value or worth, that these past experiences are going to leave us feeling insecure about our worth today, and that these feelings can really fuel this imposter syndrome. They can leave us with a sense of negative self-talk, or believing that we're less than, or believing that we're not worthy, or believing that we're not good enough. Some of these feelings can also fuel perfectionism as a survival mechanism, that if in the past when we made mistakes, it led to us being hurt or being unsafe, we might overcompensate and feel like we've got to be perfect, otherwise we're going to get hurt, or otherwise we're going to let somebody down. And so this this sense of perfectionism can really be a result of trauma. And if we're feeling like we've got to be perfect, we're also going to constantly feel like what we're doing isn't good enough because it's not perfect, and we're never going to be perfect. So perfectionism can also really fuel the imposter syndrome. Now, when we struggle with trauma and traumatic stress, it inherently leads to a feeling of difficulty trusting ourselves. It can leave us feeling like we can't believe ourselves. We can't believe in ourselves. We can't trust our body. We can't trust our nervous system. And if we're struggling to trust ourselves, it's also going to impact our ability to feel confident about ourselves, to feel like we are worthy, and to feel like we do belong. So this can lead to us downplaying our achievements, downplaying our successes, downplaying our strengths. If we experienced being taken advantage of in the past, or we grew up in a really invalidating environment, it's going to lead to us feeling like we don't want to be in the spotlight, that, we don't want to accept praise or recognize our skills because it makes us uncomfortable, or maybe because it could make us a target for more trauma or more abuse or somebody taking advantage of us. So all of this tied up with the trauma can leave us with chronic self-doubt, with hypervigilance, that we're constantly questioning ourselves, or we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, we're waiting for something to go wrong, or we feel like what we do doesn't make a difference, that who we are isn't good enough, isn't valued. So some of the other signs of kind of a trauma-driven imposter syndrome involve feeling like you don't deserve success, even when you've earned it, struggling to accept gifts or celebrate your birthday or celebrate milestones, constantly fearing that people are going to find out that you're not good enough, or attributing success to luck instead of your own abilities, or attributing success to everybody else and not owning any to yourself, attributing all success to God, for example, rather than accepting that some of your decisions and some of your behaviors also contributed to success, struggling to accept compliments from others, or struggling to accept awards or recognition, overworking to prove yourself, but still feeling inadequate when you experience success from your hard work, comparing yourself to others and constantly proving to yourself that you don't measure up to others. So these are some of the signs: feeling less than, feeling unworthy, feeling down about yourself, feeling like what you do doesn't matter. So here's some steps to getting over the imposter syndrome and working through some of the trauma connected to it. So if our imposter syndrome is related to past trauma, then logically it means we're going to have to go and face that past trauma and heal from it, work through it. And in doing so, it's going to really reduce the imposter syndrome that we experience. So if we can recognize that the feelings of insecurity, the self-criticism is a trauma response, and that the imposter syndrome is not the truth, the trauma response isn't valid, that it's a learned behavior, it's a survival mechanism, then we can start to take some of the power out of it. So we'll have to work at reframing some of the negative self-talk that we have. Instead of believing the negative messages, we might start to realize that some of these negative messages are actually messages we've internalized from the past trauma, or from our abusers, or from perpetrators. We could start to work at owning our achievements, recognizing our strengths, tapping into our goodness as a person, separating what's real from what is not real. Just because we feel something doesn't mean it's real. Just because we feel like we're less than doesn't mean we actually are less than. Just because we feel like we're an imposter or we're a fraud doesn't mean that we actually are an imposter or a fraud. So doing some reality testing can be really helpful. A simple way of doing this is to make some notes about the situation. Maybe I feel like I'm not a good enough therapist, or I feel like I'm a fraud as a therapist. One thing I could do is write down some notes, write down some facts about the quality of the therapy that I provide, or the quality of the therapist that I am. I can list some of the reasons that I am a good therapist, some of the things clients have said to me about the quality of the therapy they received from me, or I can remember some of my training and the quality training I received, or I can remember some of the feedback that I got from colleagues. So anything you can do to tap into messages that challenge the negative beliefs can be really helpful. And it helps to see them written out on pen and paper, or in your phone on a note, because if you can see them in front of you, then they're going to feel more real. Another thing you can do is to practice self-compassion, to really own and recognize and believe that perfection is an impossible task, that as long as we're working towards being better, that we're on the right path, that we're good enough as we are, and that we can offer ourselves some compassion for what we've experienced in the past. Another thing that can be really helpful working through imposter syndrome, especially when it's driven by trauma, of course, is to engage in trauma therapy, to find a therapist that can help you heal from those past traumas that are fueling the insecurities, the lack of confidence, the feelings of worthlessness that you might be experiencing today. So a trauma therapist is specifically trained to help you work through these things, to help you get rid of those negative beliefs and replace them with positive ones, to help you feel safe enough to express those feelings of unworthiness and start to develop feelings of worthiness. So I really encourage you to seek out support trauma therapy groups, and support groups can also be incredibly valuable resources in this regard. So even if you feel like you are an imposter, that doesn't mean that you are. Your success, your skills, your growth, your value, your worth is real. One of the things that stood out to me from a speaker I saw, a colleague, he was working with individuals that had been incarcerated for different crimes. And he was doing a presentation about worth and value. And he took out a $20 bill. And he said to the guys that were in prison, "How much is this $20 bill worth?" And they all said $20. And then he took the $20 bill, he crumpled it up, he spit on it, he threw it on the floor, he stomped on it, he kicked dirt on it. And then he said, he picked it up and he said, "How much is this $20 bill worth now?" And the guys looked around at each other and they said, "Well, it's still worth $20. And the speaker said, "Well, how come after you've been spit on and beat up and kicked around and knocked in the dirt, you don't believe that you're just as worthy and as valuable as you were before all these experiences?" And like when he told me that, it really hit me as a powerful metaphor that no matter what we have done in our lives, no matter what we've experienced, no matter what trauma we've endured, that our value, our worth is a constant, that even if we feel like it's been taken from us, it hasn't been. So if this has been helpful, I encourage you to write in the comments about what's been helpful, what you learned. Maybe there's something I forgot to mention or something else that you find really helpful in dealing with imposter syndrome. If that's the case, share with us in the comments what it is that's worked for you. Sharing that with others will probably really help others that are watching this video and reading through the comments. If you want to be notified about future videos that we release on the channel, I'd encourage you to subscribe. And I hope that you found this useful.